Welcome back. In today's session, we'll be covering Edifact messages in order to provide an overview of the message format so you can understand more clearly where and why it's used. So let's start with an overview. What is Edifact? Well, Edifact in its definition is short for Electronic Data Interchange for Administration, Commerce and Transport. So you can see each one of those letters builds up the Edifact naming here. It's basically a global set of rules defined by the UN in order to formalize data exchange between two or more parties via EDI. So the real push for this is to really create a kind of global or at least European definition for data exchange so that all parties can exchange data without using tens or hundreds of different formats. Now, the aim of this session is not to bore you with the history of Edifact. For that, you can review the wiki pages available online. Here, I want to cover the basic message structure and the type of messages you can expect via the Edifact data messaging so that you can get a better understanding of what to expect and be able to potentially sort of read these messages without having too much of an in-depth understanding of the messaging itself. So what are the types of messages that you can receive via Edifact? We're going to look at a couple of the common ones here. So firstly, we've got ProDat. Now ProDat is all around your product master, so your SKUs, and it's here where you would define that information and be able to provide that to another system. Now that could be a customer supplying a list of their products to a warehouse company, which would have things like your weights and dimensions, number of cartons, how it's palletized, whether it's hazardous. There's all that kind of data built into this particular message, and you can populate as much or as little of that information as you see. And it enables those two parties to understand that potential SKU and product and how it should be handled, certainly from a warehouse perspective. But if you were integrating in any other way and you need to understand those products, you'd have that full information there. Another one are orders. So these are generally associated with purchase orders. So that could be like a receipt coming into the warehouse management system, for instance, or it could be a purchase of some other goods or services there as well. You then have INSDES. So these tend to be associated with outbound orders if you're talking about sort of warehouse management systems. And again, these will have a similar kind of structure to a purchase order because you'll be describing the items, the SKUs, the quantities, etc. there as well. You then have RecADV. So these messages are around receipt and inbound confirmation. So again, if you had some sort of warehouse system, this particular message would be confirmation back of an inbound ASN or purchase order from an orders interface. You then have DesADV. So these relate to your outbound confirmations. So if you'd have shipped an order, then you would potentially have that as a DesADV message. On top of that, you can also have other messages like IFSTAR, which are associated with status updates. So in the logistics sort of sphere, that would be related to an update of an order, maybe from a WMS perspective, or if you're talking a transport management system, this could well be an update for a transport coming through. So it could include things like a POD. It could be confirmation that it's hit a particular hub, it's been sorted, labeled, etc. And as well as these that we've described here, there are a number of many more messages that exist, all as part of the Edifact framework. However, they all present in the same way. So they all have very similar segments. However, they might have additional ones based on the message type that is being used there. Now, we talk about segments, really, if we think about those in a more sort of common and up-to-date sort of architecture like XML, they're really sort of the nodes. So we're talking about key elements here that we need in order to pass that information from one party to another. And this then leads on to things like the service segments that are required as part of Edifact, because Edifact isn't just around passing these particular messages through in their raw formats. There are some key service segments that you need in order to form that fully fledged Edifact message. So let's look at those. So the kind of segments that we're talking about here start with a segment known as a UNA. So this is actually an optional segment, but this particular segment will be at the start of the message, and it denotes things like the data separators, the decimal marks, reserved characters, and the segment terminator. Now, if you do not have a UNA segment, again, we've mentioned it's optional, then it would be assumed that this is the character set that denotes your separators, etc. in the message. The next segment you'll have is the UNB. And again, this will be a mandatory segment, and it contains syntax identifiers, the sender and recipient of the data. There'll be a date and time in that segment around when the message itself was prepared, and then you'll have like a message reference there as well. You then have a UNH, which is the start of the actual message. This goes back to our sort of PRODAT, etc. there. That's where you'll then start having some segments within on from this that will contain sort of real data related to the actual specific message we're sending. But this one will contain important messages or elements like the type of message. So here you would have things like it's a PRODAT, it's an INSDES, and it's a D96, and whatever version of Edifact, because again, because it's kind of quite a fixed and prescribed format, you have to, within the UNH element or segment, declare the version of Edifact you're using. So it's quite strict in the elements and the format of the data you're sending. You then have a UNT message, so that will then be the end of the message. So between these two, you would then have the other elements based on the formats we were talking about, the type of messages in the slide previous. And the end message will contain segment and message counts. So it could be that you're sending multiple SKUs in a PRODAT message, so you'd have those listed in there, and it'll give you a count of the messages and the count of the segments within there, or it could just be the one. So it just depends on what segments and what messages you're sending as to what the counts will be on there. But again, these are mandatory. You then have a UNZ, which is the end of the interchange, and that will have the message count, and will also contain the reference, the same reference that was declared here in the UNB. So this is the start of the interchange, this is the end, the start of the message, the end of the message, and then the content of the message will be between the UNH and the UNT. And again, it's optional, but at the start of the message, you would potentially have a UNA where you can differ these characters if you so wish. So these are the sort of service segment structures to an Edifact message. I think now it'd be quite good if we deep dive into an Edifact message, and I can show you what an Edifact message can look like, and it will give you some context for some of these segments on here and the particular data messages that can be sent. So let's have a deep dive and look at an example Edifact message. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring on screen a website called Trugo, where you can drop messages and it gives you a kind of picture as to how the hierarchy works. And I'm then also going to bring up on the right an example if star message so we can walk through the content, how it's structured, and how you would read the data. Okay, so on screen on the left, we've got a website called TrueGo, which is really useful in identifying different messages and to run through the different formats. So here, if I go to the directories, you can see you've got the various different, what we would call formats or different types there, message types or versions, sorry. So each one of these versions, if we clicked into that, will give us the various different Edifact messages that are part of that particular set of messages. And each format will have its own set, so there might be additional messages in one compared to another. But also on top of that, there'll be potential changes, mandatory fields, etc. So we can see this particular one. So a D98B has a lot more different message types than a D95A, and we can see that there. So this is quite a useful website to get your Edifact directories from. You can then click on a particular message. So if we have a look here, have we got an instairs? Got one here if I can find it. We've got an inf report here. Have we got a prodat? So we've got different message types on here that we can then literally click on. So let's go on the if sum message here, and it gives you the various different headers, a description of the various elements here, and it clearly states what fields are mandatory and what ones are conditional. So it's really useful. On the right hand side here, I've got an if star message, and we know it's an if star message because the UNH record will always tell you what the message is, and it will tell you the data formats there that are being used. So if we go into this directory now, we're looking for a D99B. So there we go, we've got D99B. So we can click on this. This will give us a list of the various messages, and then we can go and find that particular message. But what's really useful about this website is you can drag and drop a file. So if I pull on screen my Edifact, one of my Edifacts examples, so this is the one we've got on screen here, and I drag that across, it very quickly brings up on screen the message format here that we are looking on the right hand side, and we can see the various different elements that are here and whether they're mandatory or whether they're conditional. So it's a really useful website in order to break this down and get a better understanding of what a particular message format is. And if anything's wrong with it and it's not able to identify it, when you drag and drop it on here, it will tell you that. So it's really great. One thing to be really clear about here is the message on the right hand side is fairly readable. However, it's not common for Edifact messages to have carriage returns after the end of each segment, because the idea is the message format's meant to be quite lightweight from a character count perspective. So this would actually appear as one big long string. But what I've done here to make it easier to show you on screen is I've placed a carriage return at the end of each segment. So remember on the previous slides we were talking about the different service segments. We've got a UNA segment here. We can see that it's telling us clearly here that the segment end character is here. So you can quite quickly open up the data in Notepad++ and do a find and replace this for this character plus a carriage return. So you can very quickly view and at least kind of start seeing the data kind of appear on screen, and it becomes fairly readable here. So let's start looking at some of these service segments then, because we're at the start here. So we've already talked about this particular segment here, and it's using the standard UNA anyway. So from an Edifact perspective, you could actually have this omitted from this particular message. But we've got it in here just to show you its presence. We then have the UNB record here. So again, this is required, although it's not specifically around a particular message. It's there for every single type. And this is the start of the interchange. So here you've got the various elements relating to syntax and syntax version. You then have the sender, the receiver. You then have the date and the time that the message was kind of generated. and then we've got the reference here, which is the key reference related to this particular reference. And you can see I've highlighted here, it also forms part of the interchange end, the UNZ record here. And in this particular example, it's an if star and it's only for one message. We've just got a 1 counter here. Okay, so then if we look at the UNH, which we've got on screen, we can click this and you can see that it is mandatory, it's present here. And the message reference number is also mandatory there as well. So you've got the message number and then the message identifier. So you've got the message type here. So we can see here, you can click here to look at the list of codes. So we've got here an if star. So if I grab that, put that in here, we can see here it's a code to identify various different international multimodal status messages. Okay, great, fine. But you can see here that it's mandatory and it's present. We then have the message version number, that's here. The release number, that's here. And then we've got the controlling agency. We discussed earlier that Edifact is a UN generated specification. And then we've got various conditional elements around versioning, etc. there as well. So that's our UNH message header. We've then got the BGM, which is the start of a message there. So the beginning of the message predominantly here is going to be around sort of references and dates. So if we look at we've got the BGM here, we've got the document message name, which is conditional. We've then got the type here. So we've got a document name code. So we've got this as 770. So if we open this, we can go 770. And we know here that it's a status update related to a booking confirmation. So again, if we put a scenario to this, because this is issued by the carrier, we can then assume that we have had a scenario where someone's requested a transport booking with, for instance, let's say DHL, and DHL have given this as a response to turn around and say, yep, this is to confirm that we've received your booking. The next element here is we've then got the agency, if we've got that there on there, document name, etc. on there as well. So we've got the message document identification, revision number. Again, a lot of these are actually conditional. And then you've got a response type code here. So you've got your various ones here. So we've got AP here, so it's accepted. So again, this website becomes quite nice for you to understand and start breaking this message down to go, well, what's it really telling me? I know it's a status message, but what it's actually telling me? Well, we know already now this is related to a confirmed carrier booking, and then we can start reading through the rest of the elements here to understand what we're looking at. So that's telling us the beginning. We've then got DTM. So DTM records are always related to dates and times. You can have multiple DTM records. So here we've actually got a max repeat of 9, whereas a BGM, you'll always have 1 per message. Here you can have a maximum of 9 of these DTMs related to the if star here. So what is this one related to? So if we have a look, we've got a list of different codes here, and we've got a 137 code. So this is the document issue. So this is really the date related to the message itself. And then after this, you'll have the date and time period, which we've got, and then you've got the format of the date and time period. So this is the date and time related to the document itself. This is the date time stamp, and this is the format of the date time stamp. So again, with Edifact, even with your dates, you are giving codes that relate to the format as well as the physical date period value itself. So if we go on this and we put a 203 in, we can see here that it's a year with a century, 2-digit month, 2-digit day, 2-digit hour, 2-digit minutes. Now, if it was important to get seconds, then you would need to have a 202, and the value would need to then have the seconds provided as well. And there are various different date formats in here, but again, they need to conform to one of these values. We then get into more around the message that we're looking at here. So this if star, we've got a TSR record here. and that's simply just got a code there of 30. So we've got a contract and carriage condition code that has been provided here. So actually on here, the TSR is actually conditional, but we've been provided it here. It's got a maximum of one repeat, so it's one segment, as we call them here. So if we then go in here and look at the codes, we can put a 30 code in here and see what we get. Peer-to-peer. So the carrier of the cargo is only responsible for the main carriage. So it's just a peer-to-peer code here. And again, you'll have various codes, standard codes related for different things. So where it's combined transport, I mean, there'll be quite a number here related to different transport allotments, non-operative flight, wait list, etc. So we know we've got that record there. Now, as we go through these, there are various segments that are going to be common to other message types, not just if star messages. So a BGM is a very common element. A TTM is very common. And an AD, which is your name and address record, is again quite common. So here we've got a name and address record. We've got a partner code of CA here. So we can open this and we can have a look at our party code qualifier here and go, well, what is a CA? So what's a CA? And we can have a look through here and find what a CA here. So a CA is the carrier. So okay, we've got a carrier record here. We'll then have the carrier code, the party identifier details here, any codes related or identification codes here. So that looks like we've got a 160. So that's a party identification. So we've got a code here of SBDU. And when we're looking at integrating this with a potential, let's say another platform, let's say it was SAP, for example, we can go, well, actually, this will then link up to a carrier record or entity in SAP with a code of SBDU, for instance. So it's that type of sort of linking those records up and understanding that when we're looking at integrating this message with our sort of end platform there. And then moving on from that, we've got the various elements around the name and address and the line, etc. So a plus here is around the different elements here. When you've got a sort of colon here, this is around breaking those particular lines. So you can, for instance, on a name and address, have an address line, another address line, another address line, another. So we've got potentially 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 address lines there. And in this scenario, we've just got potentially a couple. And then we could then break that out with another plus, and then we'll have the party name. So again, we've got the party name on here, and we can have multiple elements of that. So we can see here that we've got very fixed lengths or prescribed fixed lengths of, let's say, 35. So if we're going to provide a name and address record, and this is a much better one here, where we're going to go over those particular lengths, then we can use a colon to denote, well, actually, this is the address line, this is the address line, and we can extend those out to use or fully utilize all of the address line records there. And then we'd have a plus to go, actually, this is now the party name. And we've got the party name details and the street, etc. here as well, and the city name. So here you've got all the way through to here, you've got, like, let's say, the city name. At the end of here, this is going to be the postcode. So at the end of the name and address, we've potentially got the postcode here. So that's our name and address records there. So if we come out of that, we've then got a CTA record here. So we can have a look and see, well, what is a CTA? So we've got various different elements on there. So if I open this out, we've got name and address. There we go. So CTA is contact information. So here we've got a CW, and again, in the same way, we can start having a look at that. So confirmed with. So now we can say that it's been received, it's got there, and it's now confirmed with a contact of Sam Skip customer service. So they've confirmed that, yes, we've received that. So assuming this is then, let's say, for instance, it was DHL, it would be like DHL customer service confirming, yes, we've got that particular item, or we've got the order for that item now. Yes, that's great. We've got the confirmation. And then you've also got a com record here as well. So you've got your communication contact, And again, we can go through here where we've got the various codes, qualifiers and numbers there. So if we look at here, we've got an EM, electronic mail. So there we go. So we've got that kind of element on there. And we can have a telephone number or whatever that is there. And again, we've got another name and address record here. So if we just minimize this back up, we go back to name and address, we can then start having a look and go, well, actually, what is a CZ? Is the consignor. So we've got the carrier name and address record. We've now got the consignor. So the again, it fully describes this here, but you know, the party which by contract with the carrier is the one that's sending the goods with the carrier. So if I was sending this to a particular customer, this would then be my my details, my contact information, my name and address record. Okay, so after that, we've then got reference elements here. So again, you can have multiple references related to various different elements here as well. So we've got SIs, we've got AIWs. I'm going to guess that's an airway bill number, but let's have a look. So if we go AIW, okay, we've got a transport section reference number. So again, we've got that number there. We've then got an SI, and then we can find what the SI is. We've got then an SRN, which is a shipment reference number. So we've got all of those particular references there. We've got the codes for those and the reference number that's associated to each one of those. So again, it starts becoming less hieroglyphic and more understandable there as well. Okay, so after that, we've then potentially got our location here. We've got a CNI record, but it's there just because it's there just in place, but there's no detail for that. So we've got a place location identifier here. So again, it's a status message around taking an order. So it's going to have things like where it was accepted. And then you're also going to have, if we look at 125, the last place or port of call for that. So this is where it's going to be accepted, and this is the last place that it should be, or the last port of call for that place or port. So we're starting to get more information around that particular status update there as well. We've then got various other name and address records here as well. Again, if we've got a particular status that are being provided, we'll have that as well. There is places for free text and text elements there as well. So again, this will be text literals. There can be various codes related to some of these as well, depending on what sort of status and text elements we want to push through here. So we've got a note here, which is a goods description. So again, corrosive. So again, from a carrier perspective, it's very important that you're able to provide that information through. Again, looking at our message types we were talking about before, we've got our product master. We could have something that we're shipping that is corrosive by nature, and then because of that, we're able to provide that data through to a carrier because we've got that information sort of in our warehouse, and we can turn around and go, yeah, this is hazardous, this is corrosive, this contains lithium batteries, etc. And we're able to pass some of that information through there based on this message formatting. You then got your measures. So here we can see that we've got our various measures. We've got something in grams here or kilograms here, and we're able to provide the weights as part of that as well. So there's various different elements here, and we're able to use this in order to denote the elements, what they relate to from a coding perspective, and then what they relate to with regards to the message itself. So if we're providing a particular status code or a message to say, yep, this is received or this is accepted, or nope, this is being held for customs clearance, etc. There'll be various codes for that as well. We've then got the UNT message trailer here. So the number of segments in this message. So this will be a count of the segments within the message. So this won't necessarily contain, and it won't contain a count of the ones outside the message. But here we can see that we've got those main message ones there. We've got 27, and then the message number reference here of 1 related to that header piece there. And then we discussed earlier that we have the end of the interchange, which is the UNZ, and that will contain the same message reference for the UMB there. So again, this is a really useful website for this, but you can see here that once you have your carriage returns and you start splitting it down into segments, it becomes very, very readable. If we go back to our same Edifact structure here, we can look at other elements here as well. So we can search for an insdes, for instance. We can pull an insdes message up, and then we can start having a look at that. This has got a free trial on it at the moment, so I can't deep dive straight into that, but we'll have different messages or message limits based on the details there. So it may well be that for an insdes you need to provide more information around the name and addresses, where they're going to, where it's coming from, so it'd be your receiver, your delivery endpoint, etc. Where this is a status message, you're only really interested in where it is right now because you've placed the order, you know where it's going to, and its end destination, and where it's coming from. So hopefully this gives you a really good idea on Edifact message structure and a bit of a deep dive into, in this instance, an if star message. So now I've had a bit of an overview of the Edifact message format. What are the alternatives to Edifact? So the first one that comes to mind is X12. So this is used predominantly in the USA, and it's very, very closely modeled to Edifact. So there will be equivalent messages, similar to Prodact, etc., that are used in X12. It's just the structure of that message is slightly different. Other sort of newer alternatives is XML. So it's more of an open standard, which again allows for various sort of hierarchies equivalent to segments in Edifact. But even those need to conform to the XML sort of structure and formatting around that message. You then also have JSON. Again, JSON is very similar to XML. It's open source, and again, it's hierarchy based. However, it's used predominantly more in APIs. It's more lightweight. There's less characters in it, generally speaking, and it's generally used in order to pass an object representation from kind of one API to another. Although obviously it can be used for data exchange directly as well. Another format is iDocs, so this is predominantly a SAP document format. It can be used both with sort of text, sort of segment style structure. It's also in some of the newer implementations XML based, so you can get XML iDoc messages. Again, they look very, very similar to the equivalent text-based messaging or message format with the different segments, etc. as well. But it's predominantly an SAP format. So will be used to send data from or receive data into an SAP system. And that's it. That's our sort of overview on Edifact. If you're interested in any further information around Edifact, please reach out to me on LinkedIn or put a comment on my YouTube channel. Equally, if you're interested in any other message types, any integration tools, etc., reach out and let me know. I'm looking at doing some other videos looking at different integration tools and also some different message formats as well. Thank you for your time.